And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 146th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on June 16th, 2020, where I am your host, Nathan Krishnan. Here with me tonight is Hoosier Sound podcast veteran and Indiana HQ contributor Matt Lukens, where tonight we will be talking about Fred Glass's tenure at IU with only 2 weeks left before he hands over the reins to Scott Dolson. But before we get into that, Matt, how are you doing on this Tuesday night? And just what are your thoughts in general over what's happened in America the last few days?
Sure. I mean, times are still crazy. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hoosier Sound. Times are still insane. We have an epidemic. There is social change happening everywhere we look. And then at the same time, sports is starting to come back soon. We have the Premier League. My favorite team, Arsenal, plays Manchester City tomorrow afternoon. I'm very excited to see them lose by 3 goals. And then the NBA has plans to come back in Orlando, and the whole situation going around with the NBA and Kyrie being Kyrie, and that is all interesting and whatnot. But none of that really pertains to the Hoosiers unless you're friends with a Hoosier that plays the NBA and somebody chasing a title like OG might be. But other than that, I'm doing great. How about you, Nathan? How you doing?
No, that's funny. And I mean, you talk about sports. UFC's been going on for a while. NASCAR is rampant back up. All of a sudden you kind of look around and there's kind of something to watch live, at least on the weekends, which is fun. But yeah, no, the NBA, I don't know. It's still almost like too far away, if you ask me. I mean, end of July. End of July is what they're planning for. And I don't know. I don't know if it's going to go off without a snag, especially with players speaking up. And, I saw that the coronavirus itself was ramping up in Florida where you are.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Quick little interjection. This is not what the podcast is going to be about tonight, but that is what I'm worried about. I would rather them get started tomorrow than late July. Like, I get the whole let's wait and see where this is going. The longer you wait and see where this is going, where it is right now, the more opportunities there is for it to get worse, and then for the plan to get snagged somewhere along the line of the million things they have to get in place for them to come here. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the NBA live and back in action. I miss basketball. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's listening to this podcast that's missing basketball. Missing it just as much as the rest of you, but I would rather them get back to playing sooner than later, because the longer we wait, the more obstacles could arise.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting way to think about it. What our podcast is about tonight is Fred Glass, who's been the athletic director at Indiana for almost 11 years to the day. In 2 weeks, he's going to hand over the reins to Scott Dolson. But look, let's talk about Fred Glass right off the top, Matt. He was interviewed by Bob Kravitz for The Athletic in an article that was published yesterday, and he had a lot of real clear and transparent thoughts about his time at IU and what he was doing. Scott Dolson is one of his most trusted members, and we'll talk about what to expect from Dolson later on in this show. But Glass took over in June 2009, taking over for Rick Greenspan, who resigned after what IU, on their own website, calls one of the most tumultuous decades in the history of IU athletics. That is a very high-level look at what happened at the end of Rick Greenspan's tenure. Yeah. Mostly it has to do with the Kelvin Sampson saga, which we're not going to dig into. But basically, since Glass took over in June 2009, there have been a number of key decisions he's made. And, I mean, we're going to talk about 5 or 6. And in reality, Glass made about 50 or 60 real impactful decisions, key decisions during his tenure. But what I wanted to get your thoughts, Matt, are whether or not Fred Glass, who, by the way, just on a side note, if you bump into him in the halls of Memorial Stadium or the offices or Assembly Hall or wherever, he couldn't be a nicer guy. I mean, just talking about his character for a second, He's one of the friendliest people you'll meet. He's always willing to have a quick conversation with you, and he's one of the most busiest men at the university. So what I wanted to get your feedback on was whether or not Glass made the right decision. And it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about coaches. We're going to talk about stadium and arena upgrades. We're going to talk about financial challenges that he's gone through.
Sure.
So let's start with one of the biggest moves that Glass made at the start of his time at IU. And that was hiring Tom Crean to be the men's basketball coach at Indiana University. There were a number of factors that went into that move. Glass talked about it in the interview with The Athletic, talking about culture change, talking about wins and losses, talking about getting the program back up off the mat.
Right.
In hindsight, Matt, was this the right move? Was this a good move that Fred Glass made to hire Tom Crean to take over the program back in 2009?
You have to have a nuanced look at this, and you have to take an overall look at the time. Was Tom Crean a good hire? And you look at the state the program's in now compared to the time that Tom Crean inherited the program, and you say, Tom Crean did a good job. And I like Tom Crean. He won 2 Big Ten titles in 4 years. Crimson Corey will not let you forget that. However, when you look at the other coaches on the market at that time, you look at a John Beilein from West Virginia, you look at a Tony Bennett that ended up at Virginia, a lot of Virginia in that sense. You could have hired a better head coach for the IU program. However, would John Beilein have taken the IU coaching job if it was offered to him, given the circumstances following the Kelvin Sampson firing? I'm not sure. I don't have a time machine. I can't go back and tell you the answer. But what I can tell you, there was probably better candidates than Tom Crean. However, Tom Crean was qualified to do so. You look back, you had the 2004 or 2003 Final Four run with Dwayne Wade at Marquette. That's something to account for. Tom Crean is a Final Four head coach. So when you're looking at people that IU could have hired at the time, Tom Crean is near the top of the list of the hires they could have made. However, in my opinion, they could have done better, hence why he's no longer the head coach at IU. However, it was not a terrible choice.
Right. And it's interesting, the couple of guys that you mentioned there, as far as a character standpoint, as far as law abiding with NCAA rules and regulations, Beilein and Bennett have as clean a record as anyone. So
sure.
At the end of the day, Matt, good move or bad move hiring Tom Crean? We put you on the spot.
A decent move. I'd say good move.
Leaning good. Man, I'm going to say good also. Here's the deal. At the end of the day, when Fred Glass hired Crean, it wasn't for winning a national championship back in 2009. That's not why. Back in 2008, I should say. That's not why Crean was hired. He was brought in to try to get the program back to a respectable spot, to a place where other schools in the region can look at Indiana and say, hey, they're doing things the right way. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna lean yes, it was a good move. So let's talk about the end of Crean's tenure, Matt. When Fred Glass fired Tom Crean, and he really goes into detail with The Athletic about this, about all the nuances of that decision. Glass basically said, look, I could have extended him, but I thought we could have just done a little bit more with someone else. That is what Glass's thoughts were in a nutshell. So, Matt, when it comes to firing Tom Crean, yay or nay on that move?
Yay. And I think my thoughts on it before where I would have given Tom Crean another year. Before I read the article through The Athletic, I highly recommend that you go and read the article. But in the article itself, Fred lays out why and exactly what his thought process was. And now having used that information, which he said was just, look, he has 1 year left in his contract. He just lost 3 NBA players. This is going to be a rebuilding year, and he's on the hot seat. Like, what coach survives a rebuilding year on the hot seat? I mean, look at the Cleveland Browns, right? What Cleveland Browns coach survives a year of rebuilding on the hot seat? And it's none of them do. Not even the quarterback survive it. So like that's not a fair position to put Tom Crean in. It's also not a fair position to put the IU basketball fans in, because that's just another year of mediocrity under Tom Crean after 2 years ago winning a Big Ten championship, and a year of disappointment with the Thomas Bryant, OG Anunoby, Juwan Morgan team. So you're looking at it from that perspective and going, that was absolutely the right time to pull the plug on Tom Crean. If you're going to pull the plug on Tom Crean, that was the year to do it, because otherwise you're securing him financially for the next couple of years, because you either believe in him or you have ended his contract, and now there's a year in which you don't have your guy in Archie Miller on the market to go get him. So I think he had the perfect timing on the firing of Tom Crean.
You know, that's the 1 year deal that you talked about. That's really true with Crean. And Glass pointed it out. He said, look, it would have been a really tough situation for Crean and the IU fans to work through. And you know, that is an interesting point. But you know what, Matt? I'm going to take the other side of this, okay?
Sure.
Because look, we've talked about this. I'm sure we've talked about this before. It's clearly one of the most hot button issues among IU basketball fans. If I turn back the clock to when the decision was made, and I clearly remember it was on the first day of the NCAA tournament when Indiana, just as the first game was tipping off at noon something to 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, we saw Twitter explode with this news, and then I think it led Sports Center that night or something, you know, completely overshadowing day one of the NCAA tournament, at least for IU fans. I would not have hired Tom Crean looking back. And if that means extending Crean for another few years, I think I would have gone that route. Look, Crean has shown to be someone who, okay, is he perfect? Not at all. No question. He's not. But when you're talking about a coach that has won a couple of conference titles, that to me sends a loud message. That to me makes a pretty big difference. We've seen a lot of coaches. I remember seeing Jay Wright at Villanova or even Matt Painter at Purdue have a lot of difficulties winning in the NCAA tournament. And all of a sudden, you know, if you run into the right luck and you run into the perfect team that has the great chemistry and versatile and can do a number of different things on the floor, you know, all of a sudden, that's kind of the secret ingredient you need to go into the Final Four or to make it to the national championship game. And at the time, I just felt like more than anything, Glass, who did explicitly mention this in the article, he kind of caved into public pressure. And he talked about, you know, Hoosier Nation making a difference in that decision. So looking back, I don't think I would have fired Crean, but I'm sure if you polled IU fans right now, there are going to be loud opinions either way.
Sure.
Yeah. So let's round it out. Let's round out the IU basketball story with Fred Glass running the team, so to say. After dismissing Crean, he moved on to hiring Archie Miller. And Archie Miller right now, I'm curious what IU fans think, whether Archie's done a good job, a bad job, or to be determined. And I think most people would fall in that last category, to be determined. There's still a long story to tell with Archie, especially because, look, this past season, we mentioned it time and time again, Indiana would have made the NCAA tournament, and Indiana would have, you never know. Once you make it, anything can happen. We've seen it. We've seen that on both sides, with Indiana getting upset and Indiana pulling off upsets.
Right. When
it comes to Archie, I'm going to start it off by saying, I wish Glass could have done more. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on this are. But one of the coaches that I keep thinking about, and I keep asking myself, man, what would have happened if IU brought this guy in, is Chris Holtmann, who was at Butler in the state. In the same offseason, he went on to coach the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if you look at the last few years, Ohio State, they may not be going toe-to-toe with IU as far as the recruiting is concerned, but they're making the NCAA tournament every year and they're winning games in the dance.
Right.
Would Holtmann at IU have been a different story, different roster? Probably. But I wish IU would have been able to bring him in. What are your thoughts on the decision to hire Archie Miller to run the team?
it's one, an interesting decision, and two, I believe I agreed with you at the time of the Archie Miller hire. If you go back into the annals of Hoosier Sound lore, I believe one of the first podcasts is on this subject. And in fact, I mentioned that I would like to see Chris Holtman hired from Butler at IU. I think the transition would have been great. So, in fact, I was on that train first. But that being said, I think Archie, now looking at it, is the right guy for the job. And in fact, I was in the to be decided group until the end of this past season. I think for me, he secured the job. When you look at it, he's a guy that when he first came in, I went to the first press conference. I was sitting in Assembly Hall. I was on one of the side bleachers on the left-hand side of the court by the home bench, sitting there. I skipped class to go. And he was sitting there. He's like, I want to get old and stay old. And he talked about building a foundation for the program and recruiting in-state players. And last year, we would have made the tournament with our leading scorer being a freshman and our two seniors being Devontae Green and Deron Davis, who love them. Thanks for your service to the program, but they're not exactly senior standouts, and they're not going to be large contributors to the team, people that you're heavily entrusting the team for your production on. Outside of Devontae, like Deron was a piecemeal player towards the end of his career for IU, and the leading minutes getter was a junior, right? So you're looking at it and you go, he has been building this program slowly and steadily the way he has told it. Has it been slow? Yes. Has it been frustrating? Yes. But it's getting to the point where we're now being able to see the fruits of his labor. It's happened maybe a year and a half later than what I would have expected and what most IU basketball fans would have wanted. But it's coming.
So my question to you then is, look, we've talked about Tom Crean winning the national title twice. You could throw in there he made it to the Sweet 16 on 3 separate occasions.
Yes.
When do you think 2 Big Ten titles and 3 Sweet 16 appearances by when do you think that happens for Archie Miller? Give me a year. By when do you think Indiana will accomplish that?
We're sitting here in June of 2020.
Yes.
So in order to get the 3 Sweet 16s, he'd have to do it by 2023 at the earliest. So I'm going to say 2025 is probably the year we're looking at. He's been to 3 Sweet 16s by then. And I think he's won at least 2 Big Ten titles by then. If you're making it to the Sweet 16, you probably should have won and or come in second in your conference race. That's just usually how it works. The NCAA's, the big hitters are going to be in the Sweet 16 and then the Elite 8. I would assume by 2025 we're looking at a 3-time Sweet 16 and 2-time Big Ten championship winning head coach.
I am going to take the over on that, and I hope I'm wrong. On that note, let's transition over to the gridiron, where, similar to basketball, Fred Glass made a couple of really tough decisions when it comes to the coaching staff. The first one was hiring Kevin Wilson, and that seems like decades ago at this point. But
I don't even remember that hiring, but
no, it's all good. I mean, Kevin Wilson was someone who was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And I remember when the move was made, I was an undergrad student at IU when this news came down, and I was just like, oh, this is pretty cool. I mean, this is pretty fun. Oklahoma was a fun offensive program way before this guy, Lincoln Riley, took over as head coach there. I mean, they've been a fun offensive school for a while, and Kevin Wilson kind of made lemonade out of some pretty rotten lemons. Guys like Jason White were quarterbacks at Oklahoma, and he turned them into Heisman contenders. He did have Adrian Peterson, and that's always a fun guy to have in your backfield. But when it comes to Wilson, I know his tenure ended a little, sensitively. And we'll get into that decision too in a moment. But as far as hiring Kevin Wilson's concerned, especially comparing him to Bill Lynch, the previous head coach, I think that was a home run move. Would you agree with that, Matt?
I'm not sure it's a home run move, but I do think it's a decent move. I wouldn't disagree with the hiring of Kevin Wilson because, look, who is IU going to get? However, with the issues that Kevin Wilson caused, was it worth it? And the answer is, can we stop hiring coaches from Oklahoma? Please? Have we learned anything as an athletic department? Anything that comes from the state of Oklahoma, ship it away. Just give it to Purdue, give it to somebody else. I don't want it. Kelvin Sampson, Kevin Wilson, no coaches from Oklahoma. I don't want them in the program. Get them away. However, he did set up Tom Allen to have a successful tenure. So I give him a passing grade of a 71 on this hire.
Hey, look, in some classes, a 71's pretty good. I mean, it depends on the curve. Depends. It was funny. I was doing a little research before our show tonight, and it surprised me when I looked back and I saw that Kevin Wilson ended up with a lower win percentage than Bill Lynch did as far as IU football head coaches are concerned.
Yes.
And I think even the most ardent IU football fan would be surprised to hear that. Wilson, during his time at IU, went 18-38. He did take over a very shoddy football team that he had to get up to speed to compete in the Big Ten. But still, over the course of time, it still surprises me a little bit to see that. Let's talk about the ending of the Kevin Wilson tenure, okay? Because shockingly, Wilson led IU to back-to-back bowl appearances. Mm-hmm. And that's something that just doesn't happen. It hadn't happened in decades. Indiana hadn't made a bowl game in 7 or 8 years before Wilson took them to the Pinstripe Bowl to face off against Duke. We're not going to talk about that game. But we all saw the news come down after the season ended, before IU was going to head into the Foster Farms Bowl. Wilson had won his 4th straight bucket, and bam, the news came down that Wilson had been fired on player accusations that he was a bit too hostile. He was a bit too intense and hostile. I think the word abuse was thrown around a little bit. The question comes down to this, Matt. When Kevin Wilson was fired by Fred Glass, first of all, how shocked were you? And second of all, was it the right move?
I was shocked. One, as a student, I didn't really know much. I even had friends on the football team, and they would usually tell me, like, hey, you should look out for this guy. This Watt Fillier guy is pretty good in practice. You should look out for like little things like that, right? Where you kind of hear it, you go, okay, I believe you, Ricky. And then three months later, you're like, oh my God, you're right. I heard nothing about this Kevin Wilson. There was not a peep out of the program until there was rumblings of it the morning of Kevin Wilson being fired. And I was like, what just happened? Like, this guy, back-to-back bowl appearances. When the last time this has happened for IU? Now, having looked back upon it now, what is this? We're 4 years removed from this now. It was absolutely the right move. And in fact, I think we ended up with an even better head coach because of it. I think Tom Allen, no questions about it, is the leader of our football team and the leader of our program now, and is really a cornerstone piece for the program for the future. And the watermarks of this Wilson deterioration were there. If you look at the end of his tenure and the Wilson tenure, you can kind of see the quality in the recruiting go down. And it's something that you see with Tom Allen, where the quality of IU's recruiting is going up. Players will tell other players if they enjoy playing for a head coach. It's the reason why, whether you like it or not, Mike Gundy just put out an apology video for Oklahoma State. Coaches are glorified car salesmen, which is basically, come to our program, please. We'll make you a better player. You'll enjoy playing for me. You'll enjoy the campus. Our girls are pretty. Come play football for us. Basically, how recruiting visit works. However, you have to have some personal chemistry with the head coach in order to get along. That's why really energetic head coaches like Dabo Swinney do really well with recruiting, because he comes off extremely well to either the recruit or the recruit's parents. Or you have a fantastic pedigree, like somebody like Nick Saban, who can go, I have made somebody like your son $25 million in the NFL, and he's a backup. And at worst, he's going to be making $25 million in his career. You guys can be driving Mercedes and living and going on vacation in the Bahamas if you want to, if you come and play football at Alabama. Tom Allen can now go, you can be part of the Leo culture. You can be part of building what is like a hometown, homegrown home in IU. We make IU in Bloomington home. And it's something that he's built there. At the end of the Kevin Wilson era, you could see the recruits kind of just shying away from IU. Somebody like Tevin Coleman, if he had been recruited a couple years later, might not have chosen IU because of maybe there was rumblings of, hey, Kevin Wilson's kind of mean. Hey, Kevin Wilson, sometimes maybe our drills not only just suck, but they're kind of just evil. The way he treats some people, it's really uncomfortable. Right. Like those kind of things other players are going to hear about and then be like, hey, I like IU, but like, you got to know, Coach Wilson's like this. He's really tough on the players. It's like, do I really want to go to a program where the coach is like that? So the recruiting rankings, you could tell towards the ends of his tenure that is what kind of was happening. But that's in hindsight, which is a lot easier to see.
Yeah, this is where, this is where I take my hat off to Fred Glass because it's hard to make unpopular, tough decisions. And Fred Glass put his butt on the line, and he said, you know what? I don't care how successful our football team is on the field, but if our players don't like the culture that's being developed, I don't want that type of aura around our football team. And it was easy to make fun of Tom Allen at the start. It really was. And we're going to talk about it right now, Matt, as we transition to the Tom Allen hire. It was almost comical. It was such a stark contrast between what you saw with Kevin Wilson and what you saw in the attitude of Tom Allen, that you go, really? Like, these two guys were late. Like, Kevin Wilson actually recommended Tom Allen to come coach at Indiana. These two guys couldn't be more different. But you know what? That was one of the most important developments in this football program's history, because in his short time as IU football head coach, Allen's accumulated 18 wins. He's only had 19 losses. And as far as IU coaches are concerned in the history of the program, that is an exceptional win-loss record. And you've got to think next year, Allen will either catch up to 500 or even surpass that. All he needs to do is go 7-5 or better, 7-6 or better, I should say, because Indiana's going to play 13 games, of course. It's one of those things where immediately choosing to bring in Tom Allen, which was a very controversial move. There was no full-time coaching search. There was no real look outside of Bloomington. And Glass said, look, if for whatever reason Kevin Wilson was going to go and take a job at some other Power 5 powerhouse school, Tom Allen's going to be the guy. It didn't happen under the same circumstances, but Fred Glass knew Tom Allen was the guy. And I don't know if you thought Kevin Wilson was a home run move. I'll tell you this, maybe we shouldn't be using baseball terms. Tom Allen was a 7 touchdown move. He's a 49-point higher in a football game. I don't know if that's a thing, but I just made it up. So I love the move. Tom Allen is a huge part, I think, of what's going to define Fred Glass's legacy. He prioritized football, and now he has his guy running the program.
Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. I just rambled about it for a bit, basically saying that Tom Allen is great, but he's fantastic. He's everything that you want and a head coach. He might not be as tactically sound as somebody like Nick Saban might be, right? But when you look at Tom Allen and what you want in a head coach is you want somebody who's a leader of men. And you cannot argue with the fact that Tom Allen is one of the best leaders of men out there. And then 2, you want somebody who's going to be energetic and give off a positive atmosphere, especially for a place that hasn't had a lot of positivity when it comes to football. And Tom Allen has that in abundance about IU and about the culture at IU and about what he's building at IU and what has already been built at IU. And that's somebody that you want running your program. And that's why he was perfect when he was brought in.
Yeah. And there's, what I've said to a few other people is that there's a very small overlap in the Venn diagram between coaches that can win at IU and the coaches that want to win at IU. Yeah. Tom Allen is in that overlap, and it couldn't have gone better. So to wrap up the Fred Glass part, I'm going to ask you a multiple choice question. Okay, Matt? I'm going to ask you four answers coming up here. Which of these 4 other decisions do you think are most important and will reflect greatest on Fred Glass?
Okay.
A, bringing Bob Knight back to Assembly Hall. B, upgrading a number of stadiums and arenas in the IU athletics spectrum.
Right.
C, the Student Bill of Rights, one of his biggest moves that he made midway through his tenure. Or D, just overcoming the financial challenges, and we're not even sure how challenging they are, but as it relates to COVID-19 and, hey, dealing with the financial challenges of only having 30, 40,000 people at your football games, just overcoming all of those to help IU's athletic department reach excellence. So your 4 answers are bringing Bob Knight back, stadium arena upgrades, Student Bill of Rights, or overcoming financial challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he had really much to do with the Bob Knight coming back other than basically allowing it to happen. Bob Knight was going to come back when Bob Knight wanted to come back, and I think a lot of the ex-players really helped with that. So while that is going to be on his list of accomplishments, I can't really say that that is like one of his biggest moments because while he helped, it wasn't exactly him. The stadium arena upgrades are great. I still think there should be more work done. Like this football stadium, super small for a Big Ten stadium. And while it's kind of appealing and has its own little ways, still the home side is kind of deteriorating. You guys know if you're climbing up, the ramps on either side, you can kind of see the gravel is kind of deteriorating. The concrete is kind of deteriorating. There's still a lot to be worked on when it comes to the football stadium and then the surrounding area, but a lot of good work was done by Fred Glass. I honestly think, moving down the list, his most important thing that he did was the Student Bill of Rights. It was the first student athlete Bill of Rights for a Division I college program. I think maybe even in the NCAA. You don't think you understand it as just a basic, or even more than basic, but like an in-depth IU sports fan, how important that is for the university to, as a not only just a selling point, but just in general. The fact that the students, athletes could come in from any sport and know exactly what they were getting from a university, exactly what they were allowed to do, what kind of protections they were going to get. Hey, your scholarship is going to be safe here for these reasons. Hey, you're going to be respected by your coaches we're going to look out for you for these reasons. The reasons and the highlights of the Student Bill of Rights is so impactful on this program that I don't even think we have seen the beginning of how important that is going to be for our program, because a lot of programs around the country are now starting to adopt this, and we were one of the first ones to do so, if not the first one to do so. So I props on Fred Glass for doing this, because as it goes down the line and as the years move on, this is something that people are going to come out and say, thank you for IU for doing this. Like, for these 6 reasons, I had a great time at IU, and I was able to fulfill my dream of not only getting my college degree, but competing at the highest level at a Division I university. So props to Fred Glass for doing that.
Yeah, it's the first of its kind. I mean, a 10-point document that just listed out what the school was going to do to support the student athletes. It does make a really big deal. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, Matt. I feel like the Bob Knight turn to Assembly Hall had a lot to do with Fred Glass. I mean, how many years do we talk about, is Bob Knight ever going to come back? Is he ever going to come back? No, there's no way he's going to come back. Are you kidding me? This bridge is too, it's
Yeah.
been burned and incinerated, and never even come close to being rebuilt. But that against Purdue, when Bob Knight walked on the Assembly Hall court, it almost felt too good to be true. Everyone was just so happy to see Knight come on the court, and he was working behind the scenes, and other former players like Mike Woodson, for example, definitely pointed to Glass as saying, you know what, he played a big role in making this happen. And of course, at a high level, it's just more than anything about restoring, or even I would say building pride, in the program, in the IU athletics department, IU sports program. It doesn't matter if you're 20 years old or 80 years old. That moment was pretty exciting. So that's
Sure.
where I'm going to go. But real quick, man, it's time for Who Won the Week. And, looking back at the different developments in the IU sports world over the last few days, the one I wanted to mention was Tom Allen and Nick Sheridan making a huge splash in the football recruiting area, getting 2021 dual threat quarterback, a 4-star player, Donovan McCulley out of Lawrence North High School, in-state kid, same high school as I believe Greg Oden and Mike Conley from way back when.
Yes, sir.
Dual threat QB. He had a number of high major offers from schools like Iowa and Michigan State and Purdue and Missouri. It's really exciting. I would highly suggest you guys go and search this guy's on YouTube, because wow, if Michael Penix has the career we want him to have and he's out of here in a couple of years, Donovan McCulley is your quarterback of the future. And if you're an IU football fan, Matt, you couldn't have been more excited by this news.
Oh, yeah. He's a super raw prospect, super strong arm. I mean, like, he's got a cannon for an arm. He's fairly athletic. He's a dual threat quarterback, so he can run. He's pretty mobile. He's tall. I think he's 6'5", 6'4". Last I checked on 24/7. 24/7 has a player comp to Josh Dobbs, who was a very good quarterback for Tennessee, like a very good college quarterback for Tennessee. I know we don't want to talk about Tennessee football right now, so looking at the future of the program, Donovan McCulley is a home run, and not just because he's a 4-star quarterback, because he's four-star quarterback from the state of Indiana, and again keeps the trend of Indiana sports stars staying in state and going to IU, which is always fun to see and easy to root for.
And you talked about that pipeline, about 2021 players like Jones, Aaron Steinfeld, Vinny Fiacable out of Fort Wayne. Definitely, it's important to have in-state guys on your roster and playing a prominent role.
Yes.
And it just comes down to basically, what do you prioritize? And when you look at Indiana last year on their offensive line, for example, they had a number of kids from the state protecting either Peyton Ramsey or Michael Penix. Guys like Coy Bronk from the West Lafayette area. You don't think recruiting him was huge for this program? It was massive. So bringing in a player like Donovan McCulley, let's face it, okay? He's not an offensive lineman. He's a quarterback, the prime position in sports, the most influential position in sports. And having McCulley calling signals after, a year or two of learning under Michael Penix, that's going to be huge for the program. But
sure,
as we talk about the future of IU sports, putting Fred Glass's time in the rearview mirror, let's work our way into talking about Scott Dolson. And just to give all of you listening some background, Indiana's new athletic director, Scott Dolson, is going to take over on July 1st, is a native of Michigan City, Indiana, Northwest Indiana, region guy, management degree from SPIA. He's got a degree from IU. His most interesting sort of bio nugget is that he was a student manager when Bob Knight was the head coach of the basketball program. In fact, Dolson was the head basketball manager in his final year at IU. And basically after a year in the workforce, he rejoined IU as a member of the varsity club. So he's the guy, and he's been Fred Glass's right-hand man, or at least one of his most trusted associates for the last decade or so, really ever since Glass took over at IU back in 2009. But let's just talk about the biggest issue Dolson's going to have to deal with right now, and that's digging IU and really navigating IU through this COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, college sports as we know it is going to be completely different than what it was before March.
Yeah.
When you look at how IU is going to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, Matt, and you've already seen the steps IU has taken as far as revamping, testing of athletes before they participate in activities, the things like the financial challenges they're trying to overcome. How big is this problem that Dolson has to figure out? Because let's face it, it's massive.
It's monumental. There's not exactly a word that I can say giant words that could make your head spin about how big this problem is, but that still doesn't really, factor in everything, right? Like the fact that there's going to be no fans in the stands, which means there's no income for ticket sales. Like, how does that work for a university in which we thrive off of our basketball season ticket sales and our football, whatever we sell in football tickets? Hopefully we sell a lot of tickets in football, right? How does that affect our sponsors who sponsor in-game promotions when we can't even have in-game promotions because there's no one there to see them because we have no fans? And then it goes down to what happens to the contract we paid for security when you're paying security to do what? Stand around and watch the game and possibly interact with our student athletes and possibly get them sick. Then how are you going to get coaches who have to go home to their families and live in Bloomington and having children that go to school? I mean, because schools are opening back up. What happens if their kid gets sick and then the coach gets sick and then the coach spreads it to the players and all of a sudden the entire team is sick? You can't play. So there's a lot of issues that could happen. There's so many. There's an infinite amount of issues that could happen with this coronavirus deal that he is going to have plans and contingencies for almost everything. Now, hopefully the NCAA gets their heads screwed on and kind of enacts, measures that will help. So, like I said, if a team in a league gets sick, and is exposed, maybe the league has to pause playing games for 2 weeks and then, move everything back and make sure each school has a contingency plan for, hey, that Ohio State Michigan football game that was supposed to happen, but one of the assistant coaches for Ohio State got sick and possibly got other players at Ohio State sick. That Ohio State Michigan game is going to need to wait 2 weeks until everybody from Ohio State has been quarantined. That also means that Michigan needs to stay quarantined. Like, how is that going to work? The NCAA hopefully has answers for that to kind of take the onus off of the athletic directors because they're in a tough spot right now.
Yeah, no, they really are, and it's going to be tough. I mean, the in-game promotion thing that you mentioned though kind of cracked me up. I can just imagine, just ads for sweatpants and pillows and blankets for all the fans just watching at home and chilling, right? Like, no longer are you gonna have what is it like the punting contest on the field,
right?
It's gonna be, maybe it can be virtual, like people can zoom in and just see how far they can punt the ball in their backyard.
Smithville fiber contest.
yeah. The Smithville backyard punting challenge during halftime.
I think we just got hired.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I might have to come up with some better ideas.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there, Matt. Okay? I mean, Scott Dolson's going to start his time at IU in a couple of weeks, as I mentioned earlier. If it's as simple, okay? We talked about the off the court, off the field, off the whatever problems that Dolson has to deal with, that all athletic directors have to deal with. When it comes to the actual performance of IU's two biggest teams, Okay, the men's basketball program and the football program.
Mm-hmm.
Is Dolson's time at IU going to be like a success or failure simply based on, does IU win Big Ten championships? Does IU make the Final Four in basketball? Is that all it comes down to, or is that oversimplifying it?
That is extremely oversimplifying it. The athletic director's job is so complicated that it could take an entire podcast episode to explain all the stuff that they do. Half the job that they do is behind closed doors. We don't even see any of it, whether it's contract negotiations with sponsors, whether it's making sure an athlete whose parents are sick can get the help that he needs without breaking NCAA violations. There's a lot of stuff the athletic director is in charge of. I mean, he's in charge of 24 sports, varsity sports, and all the athletes, and the coaching staffs, and the training staffs, and the people that tutor, and everything. There's thousands of people he's in charge of at IU. So when you look at it, you have to look at it in segments. You have to look at it sports-wise. And by sports-wise, football and basketball and volleyball and men's soccer probably get weighted more than sports like, well, swimming, diving is pretty important, but like polo, like water polo is going to be less on the list. And when we look at the success of water polo compared to the success of men's basketball, I don't think I'm pretty controversial about that. When it comes to IU sports. And then there's another segment about the people segment is, did he make the right hires for the positions? Is the athletic program following the rules correctly? That's the people segment. And then there's the financial segment, which is when Scott Dolson, how he finds the program now, which is very, very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good.
At least pre-COVID.
It's in good shape. Yeah, it's in good shape if you subtract the fact that the world's ending. Yeah. The financial status of the athletic program is solid. How do we find it when Scott Dolson eventually retires or leaves? Is it better or worse? And those are the three segments that you judge an athletic director on.
Yeah. Which one of those three do you think is most important? I think right now, personally, I think I would probably have to lean the financial side more than the other two, just because of how challenging IU and all the other athletic departments in the country, how challenging it is right now for them to overcome the financial problems of the pandemic. What would you say as far as which one of those three is the most important?
I would agree with you that right now, in this exact moment, financially is the most important. However, for the average fan, the most important is the winning or losing of the teams. Now, whether that is fair to him or not is an entirely different question. But the same way we're going to look at what the athletic director has done now, my brain hurts. Fred Glass has, I wanted to say Scott Frost, and that's not our athletic director.
Thankfully,
Scott Dolson and then Nicholas Frost stuck in my head. I don't know. Whatever Fred Glass has done,
right,
is going to be judged by the Tom Green and the Archie Miller hire and how they do. And it's the same reason what's going to happen for Scott Dolson. However, that being said, right now, how we should look at him is the athletic program's financial situation going to deteriorate thanks to COVID-19? With some really shrewd moves and some luck, we could end up on the other side, even keel, the same, 50-50, we didn't move at all. Or we could even increase our financial standing because of maybe we get some better television deals because of the Indiana viewership numbers or whatever it is, right? So when we're looking at that side of things, that's probably the most important right now.
Yeah, for sure, Matt. I know as we move on here, I know you've got a pretty exciting social media shout out to bestow upon the listeners. Who are you shouting out tonight in your social media shout out segment? I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So as we wind down the podcast now, I think there's one thing that we can end on. And I think Colin Hartman, when he tweeted it 6 hours ago exactly, said it best. And by the way, Colin Hartman, if you want to follow him on Twitter, he's got a fantastic Twitter account. That's at Colin Hartman 30, and Colin has 2 L's in his name, so I had a hard time finding him because I was spelling it wrong. It's Collin Hartman with an A 30 on Twitter. He said, I miss Bloomington. I miss Assembly Hall. I miss the fans. I miss the atmosphere. I miss my teammates. I miss basketball. I don't think I could have said it better myself. I miss my teammates too, even though they're not really my teammates, but I would like to pretend that they're my teammates. But I do miss watching my team play. I really missed March Madness and seeing the Hoosiers in it. And I really miss basketball. We were just talking about, you opened the podcast on it, and we're going to end the podcast on it. I miss basketball. I want them to be back. And I'm sure I share the same opinion with the rest of you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And just remember, for those of you listening, you can follow us at the Hoosier Sound, as well as our partner at Indiana HQ, which I know you and I, Matt, we've written some fun stories for that website. You can head over to indianahq.com for everything in one place. But that about wraps it up for our 146th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support, especially for those of you who voted in our Twitter poll. Was Fred Glass's time at IU a success? Interesting question, isn't it? Straight up, yes or no? Thank you to our live audience. You guys are all beautiful people. To hear more fantastic interviews like the one you heard today, and more episodes like the ones you heard today, be sure to follow at the Hoosier Sound at Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to the website indianahq.com to find it all in one place. Lastly, if you enjoyed our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow the podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we will see you next time.
Peace. Stay safe.